Surprise! We know we said we were going on break, but we wanted to come to you with a special episode release in celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which was just a couple of days ago, and heralding the upcoming beginning of February, Black History Month. We wanted to share this very special interview with you all that we did about a month ago, and we think you're going to really enjoy it.
I'm Autumn Brown, queer science fiction writer, a theologian, mother of dragons, and a healing justice facilitator for social movements living in Minneapolis.
And I'm Adria Marie Brown. I have written books, and I'm part of the Emergent Strategy Ideation Institute. And I pay rent in Detroit, Michigan.
This is How to Survive the End of the World, our podcast about learning from apocalypse with grace, rigor, and curiosity. And we are so excited and grateful and just beyond thrilled, even enlightened, to have two very, very, very special guests joining us for our show today. We have incredible Black Buddhist teachers, Lama Rod Owens and Reverend Kyodo Williams, joining us for the show. Lama Rod Owens is an author, activist, and authorized Lama, i.e. Buddhist teacher, in the Kagyu school of Tibetan Buddhism, and is considered one of the leaders of his generation of Buddhist teachers. He holds a Master of Divinity degree in Buddhist Studies from Harvard Divinity School and is co-author of Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation. Owens is the founder of Bhumisparsha, a Buddhist tantric practice and study community, and he has been published and featured in several publications, including Buddha Dharma, Lion's Roar, Tricycle, the Harvard Divinity Bulletin, and he's offered talks, retreats, and workshops in over 7 countries. Lama Rod facilitates undoing patriarchy workshops for male-identified practitioners in Brooklyn and Boston. His next book project will explore transformative anger and rage and is due out June 2020. Reverend Kyodo Williams was once called the most intriguing African-American Buddhist by the Library Journal, and one of our wisest voices on social evolution by Krista Tippett. She is an author, maverick, spiritual teacher, master trainer, and founder of Transformative Change. She's been bridging the worlds of personal transformation and justice since the publication of her critically acclaimed book, Being Black, Zen and the Art of Living with Fearlessness and Grace. Being Black was hailed as an act of love by Pulitzer Prize winner Alice Walker and a classic by Buddhist teacher Jack Kornfield. Her co-authored book, Radical Dharma, alongside Lama Rod Owens, is a powerful wake-up journey that is igniting communities, activists, Buddhist, and beyond, to have the conversations necessary to become more awake and aware of what hinders liberation of self and society. The Radical Dharma events that have emerged from the book, connections, circles, and conversations, have initiated profound healing and deepened commitment to dismantling oppression across lines of race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and other divides. Ordained as a Zen priest, Reverend Angel is a sensei, the second Black woman recognized as a teacher in the Japanese Zen lineage. She is a social visionary that applies wisdom teachings and embodied practice to intractable social issues at the intersections where race, climate, and economic justice meet. She coined the name for the field of transformative social change and sees it as America's next great movement. In recognition of her work, Reverend Angel received the first Creating Enlightened Society Award from the International Shambhala community. I'm just so grateful that you all joined us. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yay, welcome. So, your amazing book, your collaboration on the book Radical Dharma has been widely read and celebrated by Buddhists and non-Buddhists alike. We were wondering if you could share a bit about what led you into this collaboration and what community has grown up in the wake of the book. particularly because a part of the development of the book involved these conversations that you hosted in a bunch of different communities. So interested to know a little bit about how those communities have continued growing and unfolding.
Rod, you take part one, I'll take part two.
Okay, Reverend Angel. So yeah, my story begins in, pretty much 2014, on the summer of Ferguson, summer of Israel bombing the Gaza Strip, and also the summer of me actually transitioning back to Boston from DC, where I'd been teaching for about 2.5 years, running my own meditation center in Sangha. And in this kind of transition back, really like feeling into this need to become much more active as a Dharma teacher in this new emerging movement for Black lives, but really not knowing how to do that. And having a lot of questions, having a lot of confusion. And really, in that period, this was like late July, early August, coming back into contact with Reverend Angel, who we had met maybe a year ago, and had started getting reconnected during this transition for me. And just coming back together and just kind of like coming back into this dialogue that we had started a year ago, but the dialogue was being informed by this urgency that was happening around us. And for me, that was, really the beginning of what people are, considering like radical Dharma, was our conversation together, which was later, kind of captured by a magazine called Buddha Dharma. So that's part one.
Cliffhanger.
And I'll say for me, it was really apparent that there was, as the Black Lives Matter movement was, emerging and changing and pivoting and having to be responsive to the, kind of egregious violence and aggression against Black bodies. What was apparent to me is something that had been a thread for a long time, is like where in the course of the movements of people coming up that were queer, that had been pushed outside of churches, that had been pushed outside of or left behind in spiritual communities, like where was the spiritual heart of our movements, and that where was the thing that quelled that anger, that healed the wounding, even as we did the work of understanding that it was necessary and urgent, as Lama Rod said, for us to confront systems in a way that hadn't been happening for a while in a movement form. We had a lot of disparate things happening, but really Black Lives Matter kind of brought our sense of movement, I think, back together in a way that was palpable, but also I felt, having lived this life as a Dharma teacher, the significant loss of the sense of the healing, and what kind of healing, like, healing in an explicit way, healing and a regenerative sense that the work could be founded and grounded in Dharma, like in truth, so that we weren't kind of going back and forth between like, okay, here's the work over here, shout and push and struggle for what we want, and then here is maybe healing over here, here's maybe self-care over here, but how did the work, and Adrienne Marie knows, like, we were in this conversation about transformative change, right? Like how change happened in a way that was transformative in and of itself. Like, how do we do this work in a way that transforms us, transforms the system, and not deplete us and kill us at the same time. And of course, at the same time, as part of these Buddhist communities where there was extraordinary power in teachings and opportunity for liberatory teachings, and just an overwhelm of whiteness, an overwhelm of white supremacy, like a kind of stealing of the air of the possibility of the breath that became the mantra of the movement. I can't breathe. And there we were in a liberatory teaching that was stealing the breath out of the possibility of liberation. And so it felt like these, and so we needed the movement in one place, and we needed the deep liberatory rest in another place. And so for me, that was a driving piece of like, how do we have these worlds not come together? Because that, like, I'm not interested in that. Like, how do we have these worlds come to understand that they each have something for each other, that we're made more whole in movements by the rooting in spirit, and we're made more complete in our possibility for liberation by understanding that our social reality and the reality of justice is what liberation is about.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful that y'all did this project, that you found each other, and that you're sort of pushing this edge and continue to push this edge. And as we were preparing for the show, we kept sort of joking like, oh my God, we're going to get to do the Black Buddhist show. Like, we're doing the Black Buddhist show. And then I was like, I wonder if y'all actually identify as like Black Buddhists. Like, is that the way that you would call yourselves? And, I know that identity, it's very easy for us to slot people into identity boxes from outside of each other. And so I was curious, is that how you would identify yourselves? And if yes, I'd love to hear this about the space that you're carving out in Buddhism for Blackness. And if not, if there's something else or more nuances, we'd love to hear about those nuances.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, and I have no problem identifying as a Black Buddhist. And I think that identity is being created moment by moment. I don't, there's no template really,
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that I am deeply informed by being, kind of brought up in the South, and being brought up, within a community of poor Black people, and that's a really intense kind of identity location for me, because it actually taught me a lot about how to be in the world and how to practice a kind of resiliency and survival. And that's what I bring into like this whole position of being a Black Buddhist in the world, as well, and in terms of like Buddhism too, it's like my Buddhism I often say my Dharma is always shifting, it's always evolving, and so I'm not just, I'm not really just a Buddhist, everyone's, always joking with me these days because they think I'm becoming like a Hindu practitioner, which is kind of true. Like, I'm kind of like,
well, and could you tell us like what does that mean for people who are like not deeply steeped in the practice of Buddhism or the practice of Hinduism?
Yeah, like for me, it's not just the Buddha, it's not just meditation, but it's more of a tantric orientation. Tantra meaning, a practice and orientation towards, a kind of mysticism. But that mysticism is held by the practices of working with the subtle body energy, working with esoteric yoga, working with deities, working with plant medicine as well. It's touching into this unseen world in a way that is very powerful, very direct, but also super risky, and volatile. I mean, it's extremely volatile.
Yes.
And this is why, for me, teachers and guides and mentors are so incredibly important for me, and Blackness is informing all of this along the way. Which is, I think this is why I'm showing up in such an interesting, unique way, in the world. Like when people say Black Buddhists, or when people apply this term Black Buddhists for myself and Reverend Angel, I think that, I see us occupying a very dynamic, versatile, and evolving positionality within American Buddhist spiritual, communities right now. I think we're, as Reverend Angel has already been pointing out, and as we point out in Radical Dharma, there's a way in which, our ethic is to bridge the social and, to bridge the relative and the ultimate together. As Reverend Angel has said many times, there's no ultimate liberation without social liberation.
Right.
And we have to work with that complexity. So I think that's what it means for me, definitely, to be a Black Buddhist, is to actually hold that intense complexity all around, and to wake up sometimes and to say, oh, I don't know how I'm identifying, but I know that I'm trying to just like reduce violence, and I'm trying to be as compassionate and loving as possible, but I'm also just trying to also tell the truth, and to try to own up to the things that I'm experiencing and feeling in the moment. And regardless of if it looks messy or not, this is just kind of how it is. That's
true.
So,
like, it often looks the messiest when we're doing the best work. What about for you, Angel?
Yeah, I think I most often think of myself as the un-Buddhist. I think
that's great.
And that's like a really like that's a choice. I think there's a couple of different ways that speak to my orientation overall. I think about being an un-Buddhist, and I talk about this idea of being atapos, which means out of place. And so, and that Socrates said that all philosophers, and I think philosophers these days are activists, that Socrates says that all activists had to be out of place in some kind of way, because to be out of place is to give yourself permission to tell the truth, because being in place, to belong to something, requires you to adhere to a certain amount of untruths, a certain amount of stories or narratives that are part of the binding together of whatever that group or community or organization or so on and so forth is. And in order for me to be in a whole truth, in a radical Dharma, means to be out of place. So I practice actively being out of place and un-Buddhist to push the edges of that complexity. And I think, I was listening to Lama Rod, and it's like he landed exactly at the place that I think I'm most holding and in the practice of, is giving people through by pulling threads of blackness, right? The thread, which I can't not do, because that's what it means to be Black and American. Like I'm holding blackness. Like I am blackness. For a long time I would say I don't do people of color spaces. I am a people of color space. Like I don't have to lead a quote unquote people of color space, because I'm here, and that means it's a people of color space by nature. Like I change the room. Blackness changes the room of any space that it goes into when it's inhabited freely. And so to be inhabited freely, I thread the teachings of the historic teachings of the Buddha, but all Dharma teachings, really, all teachings, they're about the truth. And I make it my business to understand Dharma wherever I see it. There was some point, I was just speaking about this, that I was in a thick and coarse rub. I had a lot of conversation with my root teacher, and my, no content necessary, but suffice it to say, I got off, and I was like, white folks think they own everything, and they think they own Buddhism, and they think they own Zen, and so be it. You go ahead. You can own Buddhism and you can own Zen, because white folks think like this is how you do Zen. Like went and appropriated teaching from somebody else and then are the arbiters of like how it happens. And I was like, fine, you can, because I'm not trying to have this conversation. I feel like I'm in the sandbox and I don't want to be in the sandbox anymore. So you can try to own Buddhism and you can try to own Zen, but you cannot own Dharma. And so I've lived inside of the notion and the container and the framing of Dharma and that complexity of what it means to live and navigate the space between the relative and the absolute. That whole truth is something about this really, as Lama Rod said, dynamic living into the what it means to both be a black body, right? Speaking through the teachings of Buddhism, to be a person that is speaking and has the language and capacity to speak the teachings of the Buddhist and through a black lens, right? Like that's actually two different directionalities, right? Like rooting in one and then speaking through to another. And to hold the alive complexity of what all of that means, to hold the complete truth of like radical love for everyone and all beings, and also to hold the truth of the necessity of loving blackness unto itself as a distinct and specific and particular and morphing and not monolithic, and yet somehow also really, really palpable truth, right? Like that blackness is a truth that can't be bound or held or contained or be expressed as monolithic, but it's also unique and specific, and we know it when we see it and when we feel it and when we smell it. And I think that when we express the liberated blackness through the teachings of the Buddha, then it actually gives every other body, access to liberation for themselves.
Yes. Beautiful. It's that Combahee River
That's
Buddhism.
That's a black feminist statement if I ever heard it. Exactly. I love that we went to the same
because
place.
Black folks weren't meant to be free, right, in this land. And so if we are free, it harkens the truth of freedom for everyone.
Right.
Like if we are liberated, it says that it's possible for everyone, because there's such systemic intent to keep us from being liberated. So I feel like, like Lama Rod said, it's like we're like so messing with not just the Buddhist space, like we're messing with spaces of what it means of liberation. We're saying something, I think, in many ways, and I think this is unfolding. We are saying something about what it means to be black and liberated. Therefore, we are saying something about liberation altogether.
And you're saying that in a time of intense change and transformation politically, globally, and because our show is very focused on apocalypse, we were really curious to hear y'all's perspective on this moment and what it means to be teaching liberation, rooted in like a liberatory understanding of blackness at a time of apocalypse, a time of like a time of global transformation, where there are parts of our society or systems within society that are grasping and holding so tightly to the old way. And yet there is this inevitable birthing of something new that is unfolding. And the practices that you both are teaching are so critical to being fully present to that birthing. So we're just curious to know what your perspective is on trying to teach liberation inside of apocalypse.
Yeah, I think so much these days I'm coming from a position of being a prophet, but I'm also trying to avoid being stoned to death. So it's a tight balance there.
It's so hard out here.
It's hard out here for a prophet.
Hard out here for a prophet.
Exactly, hard out here for
because
a prophet.
I feel very deeply into this, energy of the apocalypse, this energy of unveiling, this energy of truth telling, and knowing that this truth, that people aren't ready for the truth, and that the unveiling of truth will inevitably mean the end of people's lives, and to hold that truth and to communicate that, like, not all of us are going to make it, and that's not what the apocalypse means. The apocalypse doesn't mean that everyone's going to get there. It means that, like, if you're ready, you're going to get there, and and for me, it's been, a period of just like mourning all of that, allowing my heart to break, and that breaking of my heart actually helps me to connect to the fear, the anxiety, the suffering, the discomfort that so many people are experiencing right now. And to help people to understand that this is the process, like the breaking away, the breaking down, the heartbrokenness. This is the path forward into this new way that we have to start living into right now. And that's like my Dharma of transformation currently, and I have to keep it simple. I have to keep it direct, but I have to keep it very authentic. For me, this is how I manage the apocalypse. It's just by allowing all these old ways that I've been invested in to kind of fall away, to break open, and to allow the discomfort to arise, and to have that discomfort held by, a sense of deep love, a sense of deep compassion for myself, and a sense of deep compassion and love for everyone else around me, to keep my heart tender. And it's not like we can't have fun either as well. So, like, having fun is really definitely part of when I'm helping people.
It's such an important part of the end of the
world. Speaking of pleasure activism, let's like do it. Let's get out there and like actually, and this is Tantra here. So pleasure becomes the path to liberation.
Yes.
Yes. But it has to be this kind of ethical, kind of mature expression of pleasure. It's not just, let's just like do it and lose it. It's like, let's get focused. Let's channel this energy, because this energy is so important. Yes. It's so vital. I think that's what I learned growing up, in the South. It's like, let's use our joy, let's use our pleasure to get free. Let's use it to get closer to God. Yes.
Yes.
And I want us to return to that. That there's God, there's
like that ecstatic experience.
Exactly.
Yes.
There's a divinity. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's exciting because the question I am sitting with is, I know for myself what meditation and mindfulness have done. And I think in a lot of ways, meditation and mindfulness are part of why I got to pleasure activism, right? It's like, oh, there's something inside of me that predates trauma and that predates or a traumatic concept of my identity, like a traumatic understanding of Blackness or queerness or fatness or any of these things. There's something inside of me that can connect to something that is pleasure. And I still see that in this moment of fear and race war and genocidal climate decisions and things like this, that it can be very hard to make a case for people to sit and to get still and to turn in. And so I wanted to hear from both of you, why meditate right now? Like what is the case for that mindfulness and meditation from where you're sitting and from what you're inviting people to?
Yeah, I think of, as I understand it, that apocalypse means revealing. And we have all these other ideas of like, it's the end of the world, but it's the end of the world as we know it, right? And
exactly.
Like when we think about profit, one of the things that we teach and communicate in Radical Dharma, we have this like RD5, which is like the framework of RD5 is a framework for liberation, and it's so that people can try on what it means to get a lens on liberation from where they stand, because we're Buddhist or un-Buddhist or whatever we're doing, and we're fat and we're black and we're queer and we're all, and everybody's not like that, and so we wanted to be able to communicate how do you recognize a radical Dharma in your life and cultivate a radical Dharma in your life. And so we talk about the fourth thing as being prophetic praxis, and so we talk about the praxis, like where the rubber meets the road of being a prophet, is about telling the truth of these times. We often think of prophets as talking about the future, but really what prophets are doing, which is why they get stoned, is they're actually talking about now, right? They're speaking into what's happening now.
Exactly.
Right?
I'm praise dancing. Praise dancing.
Yes. They're actually, right, they're revealing the apocalypse that is happening while everybody else is holding on to, we say old ways, but I want to say untrue ways, right? They're not just old ways, they're untrue ways. And so what we're in the skirmish of is people trying to hold the veil down, right? And the apocalypse is about like revealing and revealing and revealing. And meditation gives us access to a revelatory lens, a way in which to see ourselves in a way that's more whole and more true, beyond information, right? Beyond like intelligence, as in like in our heads, beyond what's been fed to us, because we're all conditioned, right? So we're conditioned. And so who were we, and this is very Zen, right? Like who were we before the traumatic relationship, right? The traumatic holding or relationship. I love the way that you said that, Adrienne Marie, of our identity, right?
Yes.
Right? That identity was complete and whole and live and free, and then we were given a traumatizing relationality to our sense of our identity. And so meditation is about revealing, right? Meditation is in and of itself an apocalypse, right? It is a path to live into the apocalypse. It is a path to revealing the truth of who we are, beyond the ways that we have that truth has been obscured for us by conditions, by the conditions of racism, conditions of white supremacy, the conditions of anti-queerness, the position, or just like like the binaries, right? All of the binaries, is so like clear for me. It's like the binaries are the hell realm. Right, the binaries are the place that keeps us from being free.
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
and
I
so
deeply agree.
so to be able to reveal, we don't know what pleasure is, right? Until we actually are able to see ourselves in a way that is unveiled, right? And we don't even understand what our pleasure is, and so we have these debased ways of thinking about having fun, rather than these ways that are generative and that feed our energy body and feed our sense of liberation and capacity and wholeness and fullness. And so I don't know what else you would make time for, right? Other than meditation, like frankly, all things considered, because it is like what is now. It is revealing the truth of who you are, and that's everything about being free.
Yes, beautiful.
I'm curious because I know for myself, when I sit and meditate, one of the things that becomes like immediately clear to me is how much fear exists inside my body and in my mind and in my systems. And I'm wondering if you all can speak to how a practice of meditation helps to confront fear or to be with fear, particularly because so much of the work you both do is around, race, gender, sexuality, class, all of these binaries, all of these systems that function primarily through fear and violence. How does meditation support us to work with our fear, to exist with our fear?
I think that what meditation gives it helps us to come into an awareness of is that there is nothing to fear. That it helps us be comfortable in our own bodies. That we, and part of how it does that is that it has us to confront the ways in which we spin stories and narratives, and actually that most of those stories and narratives are actually other people's narratives and stories. And that the fear is generated not from the truth of who we are, the fear is generated from the stories we have about the truth of who we are. And so meditation allows us to become comfortable with ourselves, to make friends with ourselves, with our mind, right? To actually make friends with the fact that our mind is constantly regurgitating and propagating this propaganda about who we are. And we kind of like watch all of that and see all of it and see how like wild it is and see how like unbridled it is and how intense it is and how also unchecked it is and unexamined it is. And that itself is a source of curiosity. And so I think the antidote to fear is curiosity. So we develop a kind of curiosity just by the practice of watching and becoming aware of our mind. I was just saying, I just started, it's not actually public yet. It will be public by the time you put this out there, as a senior advisor to Mindful, which is a meditation studio in New York. They have two studios in New York, and some online stuff, Mindful video and so on. And I was talking to someone, I said, the great thing is that if you are willing, if you're even willing to look at your mind, right, you walk in the door, you're of a meditation center, of a studio, whatever else it is, in your meditation closet, like you're 50% ahead of the game, right? Just the willingness to look. And then if you actually sit down and do the work of looking, you're at 80%, right? Like ahead of the game of this quest for humanity and for wholeness. And so like that's the major part of it. Like you're 80% there just by sitting down and being willing to say like, oh, this is what the fuck is going on here. And this shit is driving me. Adrienne Marie, like back in the day when we were doing Rockwood, like one of the things I came up with is like, how do we explain this? I was like, I don't want to teach activists to meditate. I have to tell them why it matters, right? And so I developed this whole little cartoon thing to help people understand that really this inner me is driving your life, right? It was like this whole thing. It's like inner me is driving your life. You think you are driving your life, but actually you turn around, you look and there's roadkill left and right. And so then you have to figure out, well, if I'm intending to like get it together, to be kind, to be compassionate, but I'm leaving the roadkill, if you will, behind me of decimated relationships, fragmented partnerships with, in movement spaces, in organizational spaces, in home spaces. If I'm leaving fragmented relationships and all of that, but I have this other intention, like where is the gap, right? And so we like try to go and like find the gap. We mind the gap between what our intentions is and what it is we are hoping to, how it is we're hoping to show up in the world, and like what's actually happening. And what we realize is like there's this whole storyline, like multiple storylines, not even our own storylines, that are driving us. And meditation gives us curiosity. And so that quells the fear, is just to realize the truth of like, there is like somebody else behind the fucking curtain, right? And all of this stuff that I thought that was going down is the machinations of like this other system like controlling me. And then the question is, what do I do about it?
Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, often when I look at fear, working with fear of my body, fear of my mind, it always leads me into having to negotiate trauma.
Yes.
So much of like those experiences that we're afraid of is really trauma based. experiences. It's racial trauma, transhistorical trauma, identity-based trauma. It's complex trauma, simple traumas. It can be a variety of traumas, but that fear can be a symptom of that. And for me, early on, when I was really working with that, I was learning how to be in relationship to that fear and to that trauma that was around that fear. And meditation was actually helping me to hold the space for these experiences. Holding the space really means that like I'm allowing these experiences to be there, but I'm looking at the ways in which I'm habitually reacting to what I'm experiencing. And in that habitual reaction, actually perpetuating these experiences. These experiences of discomfort that I keep having, and in that holding space, I also had to learn how to love the fear and to love the trauma, and that's something that's really hard for people
like
to
slow it down, homie. What?
Like, what are you talking about?
What are you talking about?
Ooh, yeah. Yeah, that trauma.
Love that trauma. Okay, tell us more.
So love, you can also use the word acceptance. I have to accept these things that I'm habitually pushing away. And in my next book, Love and Rage, which will be out in June.
Hey.
I'm really, I'm pushing the language of love and making it even more accessible, for people. I'm using acceptance as a way, like how do I accept the things that like I'm always running away from? How can I let those things be there? Because if I don't allow those things to be there, then I won't actually understand what they really are, and that's just like basic meditation, as Reverend Angel was pointing out. It's like I can't see what something really is if I'm always like avoiding it. That's basic like Vipassana insight practice, where you're like, okay, how do I actually gaze into the nature of this thing?
Yes. Especially if it's you, I think that that's such a big piece of what you're speaking that really, I think, reverberates with a lot of how we have approached this podcast, because when we first started, like how to survive the end of the world, it was, I think everyone was like, oh, how to build a bunker. And it was like, no, like how do you turn and face your own shadow? And how do you understand what it means to feel trust and offer trust? And how do you remember to breathe and things like that feel like these fundamental humaning skills, that are like, this is how we stay connected to what we are as a species and not just what we are as a trauma bodies, and then want to survive. I feel like Octavia Butler is kind of the prophet that guides our work here. And a lot of what she kept asking in her work in different ways was, what is a compelling future? Not a perfect future, not a utopian future, but what is a future that is compelling to move towards? And it's compelling to move towards a place where you are fully accepted, or where your wholeness is welcomed, or where the complexity of who you are is welcomed. And I really love that. And I feel so much in what both of you have been saying here around like there's this slowing down and dropping in, slowing down, dropping in, and finding the particles of pleasure, the particles of love, the particles of acceptance. And so there's a question I have here around attention and attention liberation. This is one of the ways I've been thinking about this, is like really with meditation, mindfulness, and the other things, you're liberating your attention from what you have been socialized to think is important and matters and is you. You're liberating your attention and bringing it to what you think truly matters. And how do we help people do that in this age of hyper connected, rapid fire, urgent crisis? How do we help people still focus their attention and liberate their attention if I think what we all would agree on is that liberation of attention is actually one of the roots of freedom?
Yeah. Well, I think, first and foremost, we have to as leaders, as guides, as mentors, we actually have to model what it means to hold that attention.
Word.
Too. And people are watching all the time. You know, like people are watching us on social media. They're watching us walk down the sidewalk. They're watching us walk into the room to do a workshop or a teaching. They're watching how we're holding ourselves, how we're holding that attention, and how we're expressing that particular value into the world around us. Like I couldn't have done anything that I'm able to do now without the example of teachers and guides who were doing it before me, because I wouldn't have believed in it.
Yeah.
You know, and I just love evoking, Octavia Butler, and the vision that she perpetually put out in her work of like this revolutionary way, or this transformative way that we actually have to always come back into the moment. Because if it's the transformation, like God is in the moment, like if God has changed, then we actually have to pay attention to that change, and it's so moving for me.
Beautiful.
I hold for myself, I feel like a very significant pivot was to move from the overall framework of people are born and they have to strive in order to become one with the divine, to meet God, to, they had to become, right? They had to become something. They had to become, become ascended. They had to be, they had to get there, strive there, work their way there, earn their right to the pearly gates of heaven, or whatever else it is that people, wherever else it is people are going. And I pivoted from that to fundamental goodness, to the basic sense of like, oh, we're already whole and beautiful and perfect and lovable, and in all of our permutations and weirdnesses and strangenesses and flaws and foibles, we are whole and are to be loved, and that what the work to do is to get the obscurations out of the way that keep us from being able to act fully out of that wholeness, right? And those things that have traumatized our view of ourselves, that have invited disconnect from the truth of that wholeness, and so having made that pivot, what I feel deeply into and know to be true is that everyone wants to be free, that everybody wants to be liberated, that when they feel, they taste the nectar of liberation, right? It's a taste that then people yearn for, and that yearning itself is an experience of feeling yourself called back to your own wholeness, right? That yearning is the recognition of one's wholeness, and then the impulse to move towards that wholeness, to return to that wholeness. And so therefore, when I can communicate to people that there is a design in place to rob you of your attention, so that you cannot so that you're distracted away from that yearning for wholeness, then people gear up and put their boots on and say, fuck this. Whatever that is, I don't even care what it is, and often it's white supremacy, and often it's right? It is systems of domination. They don't care what it is. They cease to care, slowly maybe, but they cease to care what it is giving them material, and they want for in the way that we are designed to want for our liberation. And so that attention and understanding that our attention and our ability to put our attention on what matters to us and find our way back to ourselves is what liberation is what the truth is the radical Dharma, is what I make an effort to communicate and to Lama Rod's words, and to communicate that not through just my words, but through my body and how I hold space, to slow spaces down that we hold, like in radical Dharma circles or conversations, to slow them down in a way that people are not just like listening to me, and I'm making the gesture of like touch, stuff coming out my ears, like it's all about my ears and my words and listening to me, and I could see people's necks craning towards me to listen, and I try to invite them back into an experience that's embodied, so that they're I'm transmitting as a teacher, as a guide, as a communicator, as a facilitator, I'm transmitting the universal knowing of that liberation in my body by how I hold my body, so that for that moment, that period of that time during that circle, that experience, maybe for just 1 minute, they feel that liberation in their own body, and their necks crane back and they return to themselves instead of me. And when we turn our attention to what matters to us, then we generate what I think of as love. Like, then we become more committed to giving the things that we love that matter to us, right? The things that we're accepting, we're committed to giving them space to be as they are. And that's what I think of as love. That acceptance is space. That acceptance is love, is space, and acceptance is space, right? And once we are willing to do the work of accepting something, we give it the space to be what it is, and that's transmuting that acceptance that Lama Rod's talking about to love.
Beautiful.
And then we can love it all. We have to love it all, because what's outside? We're, like Julia Butterfly Hill used to say, like, where is a way? What is outside of this field of life? The trauma is actually inside of the field of life. It's corrupting, but it is still part of this field of life. And to think that the work is to somehow like get rid of the trauma rather than live through it and understand its rightful place in our unfolding sets us on a very different path.
Yeah, it does. Oh, wow. Thank you both so much. I feel like, we could sit at your feet for, or rather, I should say, sit back to back, side to side, face to face, for hours.
Could I make an invitation?
Yes.
I would love people to sit with us. It sort of quietly snuck out back in August, but the Radical Dharma audiobook is out. And I've just been listening to it, and it is literally like sitting in this field of these complexities and openings. And so I want to invite everyone it is different to hear it in our voices, and to be able to actually have your voice liberated to do its own wanderings while our voices are, speaking into these truths that are ours. I think it's just gorgeous. I was listening to.
And is it like, can we find it on Audible, like anywhere you get your audiobooks, you can go get Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation?
Yeah, and you can get Lama Rod and Yasmin, Dr. Yasmin Saidullah and myself whispering into your ears about our complexity and our reality while you discover your own.
Oh, that sounds so dreamy. We are all going to do that now. Thank you both so much for joining us and for being a part of our show. We love you.
Love you too.
Thanks for listening to our show. We're on Twitter and Instagram at End of the World PC. We're also on Facebook at End of the World Show. You can make a sustaining donation to our show by visiting patreon.com/endoftheworldshow. And another thing that you can do to help our show sustain itself is to write us a review on Apple Podcasts if you are an iPhone person. How to Survive the End of the World is produced and edited by the beloved Zach Rosen. Music for today's show comes from Y'all and Mother Cyborg.